Bob is our commissioner. I knew Bob, of course, from his Stanford days as an athletic director. Very successful tenure at Stanford as athletic director. Prior to that at Iowa and Northern Iowa. And we're just very honored that Bob was able to carve out time from his very busy schedule to join us in Morgantown. And with that, I will introduce the Big 12 Commissioner, Bob Bowlsby.
Thanks, Oliver. Good morning. Nice to be with you again in Morgantown, and I am very excited for the first game of West Virginia's tenure in the Big 12. We have the enviable position of having three institutions start the season as a defending conference champion, including West Virginia, and of course Baylor had a historic year last year, so it's ironic that that's the first opponent, and also that it's homecoming, and so I'm very excited to be here, very excited to see a game in the stadium, and very excited to see your football team play. I think you've already distinguished themselves as a force to be reckoned with, and clearly you've got one of the premier athletes in all of college football in Geno Smith, and I expect that we'll have a terrific football game tomorrow. So with that, let me open it up for your questions. A media group with no questions.
Are you eager to see what the atmosphere is like? I know at times West Virginia's had a reputation of being fairly rowdy. So curious if it's traveled to Dallas and in your ears, and if you're looking forward to seeing what it's like here tomorrow.
Well, I love college football. I love college football game days, and I like seeing new venues and all stadiums are the same. They look a lot better full than they do when they're empty, even if they look good empty. And so this place has a reputation for being a very difficult place to play, and I'm sure that fact is not lost on Baylor. And it's hard to play a good team in a difficult place to play. And so yes, I'm looking forward to seeing it, experiencing it. And I'm looking forward to watching a good football game. I've been on campus for 35 years, so I seldom have gone to a football stadium where I didn't live and die with the outcome with my team. And very fortunately, as Oliver said, I enjoyed a good 6 years at Stanford, but he can take a little bit of credit for the kind of 6-year period I had, because his son was certainly a big part of why we had the success we had.
How important has it been for you guys to continue to come? I mean, you've been here in Morgantown. I know you've only been in the office since like June or something like that, but you've only been here a couple of times. I know you've been going around with the Big 12, but some of your representatives have been here in Morgantown as well. It seems like the Big 12 is making a very clear effort to show your guys' faces around here a lot and be visible.
Well, as a new member, I was here in July to participate in the celebration that represented the commencement of West Virginia's participation in the league, and I did likewise with TCU a day before. And so that was obviously a special trip. Ed Stewart from my staff, who manages the football enterprise, was here a couple of weeks ago, and I've gotten to all 10 institutions over the last 4 weeks, and a couple of them I've gotten to multiple times, and I expect that I'll be back here again. I'm going to be at Austin next week, so I'll have a chance to see WVU play again next week. And so through a combination of catching teams on the road and catching them at their home venues, I'm going to try and get to every campus for a home game before the end of the season. But once I get through the month of October, it's going to be mostly driven by who's still playing well. And given the quality of the football team at this university, I expect I'll have occasion to come back late in the season.
Bob, you've gotten the TV stuff out of the way. The Champions Bowl all of that stuff done. And expansion doesn't seem to be a terribly hot topic right now. What is your agenda now? What do you do now to go about, other than just running the day-to-day dealings in the conference? I mean, what's on your agenda as far as things to do?
Well, it's a great question, and one that I've actually contemplated a little bit. I've put a plan of work together that includes a variety of relatively mundane activities within the conference office. But one of the things that has been evident, I guess, in the first 3 months is the agenda hasn't been my own. I had the television process kind of, I landed right in the middle of that. The BCS process relative to the playoff is still in full bloom, and we've made a lot of progress on it, but we're still spending a great deal of time on it. And I guess my staff is spending some time on it, but most of it is my personal engagement in it. The Champions Bowl, we have a concept and a framework, and we're moving ahead on it, but that's what I was doing yesterday. I was in Charlotte and had meetings with the SEC, both commissioners, both managers of football, and a couple of other associate commissioners and legal staff, just going through the articulation agreements that will govern the bowl, going through the process to consider the 5 candidate cities that we have, the candidate bowls that we have, and talking about how we go about interfacing the television deal for the Champions Bowl with the contracts that we have within the SEC and the Big 12. So, there's the items you mentioned have been big items, and they're going to continue to be big items for a while. The TV contract, while the grant of rights is finished and the 2 contracts with Fox and ESPN are signed and executed, there are hundreds of details about activation that we still are working on, and until we settle in on those, there are a lot of decisions to be made. These are documents that run into the hundreds of pages, and so there's a whole lot of flesh there that we have to make sure we understand and have a consistent framework for implementation. So we're sort of in the transitional period between what I was flopped in the middle of and getting those things put to bed. Beyond that, we're spending a lot of time thinking about branding for the conference, how we go about articulating and proliferating the messages and visions of the conference. We have some other opportunities that we are working on. We are talking to a couple of conferences about a basketball, preseason basketball alliance competition of one sort or another that we could participate in. We have spent some time talking recently about whether or not any form of affiliate membership should, either for our members or including our members outside, would make any sense. So there's no imperative for that, but we're spending some time talking about it. And in large measure, the agenda going forward is all the things that you mentioned, including bringing those early things to closure. But we need to be about bringing opportunities to our members. That's what the conference office does. We manage the enterprise, but we also should be business development officers on behalf of our universities, and sometimes that's TV contracts. We're going to be spending a lot of time on our bowl alignment, because with the Champions Bowl and the playoff, our bowl alignment starting in 2014 is going to be very different than it is currently in all likelihood. So I'm not having any trouble staying busy, that's for sure.
You mentioned fleshing out the details of the TV contract that you've already signed, and one of the things that I have failed to grasp, and no one has been able to give me an explanation, is the process by which Fox and ESPN, at least this year, are are afforded their opportunities to take games. They just say that Fox will have an enhanced selection of games this year. How is that process this year, and how will it change next year? Everything so far, virtually everything so far, have been Fox telecasts. I'm not sure if, other than a few national things that are scheduled for later in the year, I'm not sure if ESPN has even touched the conference yet.
Well, I can give you the explanation you've been unable to find someplace else. There is a selection order, and that selection order it's not every other selection. I don't know it off the top of my head, but ESPN, ABC had I think the first 4 selections, and then Fox got a couple, and then ESPN gets a few more. One of the differences for Fox is that we now are on Fox broadcast television. So, for instance, the Kansas State-Oklahoma game last week was a Fox over-the-air broadcast game, and we didn't have that available to us on a national basis like we do now. And so the selection process goes throughout the entire year. It isn't on a weekend-by-weekend basis. ESPN, ABC can go in and make their selections on Thanksgiving weekend if they want to. And their selections tend to skew towards the back end of the season. That, I guess, was a strategic thing that they chose to do. And so that selection order on, I think this year it's 46 games, is articulated throughout the season. And they go, they take the whole 14-week season, and they select. When it's their turn, they draft the game that they want. And that's why Fox has some of the early games, and ESPN will have a steady diet of the late games. But that's how the process goes.
You also mentioned something about a basketball, I don't know, an alliance or a preseason challenge kind of thing. Any care to divulge any other than that? Like who you're talking to? Obviously, the Big Ten and the SEC and the ACC are already pretty much taken up in their own challenges.
We basically are talking to everybody, because those most of those contracts have relatively near-term sunsets, and so we're having active conversations, and it could at some point in time extend to other sports as well as men's basketball.
I was going to ask along that line, are there any plans or thoughts of increasing your relationship with the SEC beyond the Champions Bowl? I mean, creating, I don't know what it would be, but.
Well, we're a partner with them. At the same time, we're a competitor. It's kind of like our TV deal. Fox and ESPN are bitter competitors, but they collaborate on the Pac-12 package and on the Big 12 package. And we are partners in 2 enormous ventures, the BCS, the playoff, and the Champions Bowl. And I think it's reasonable to assume that we'll look for other ways to activate on that partnership as well. But I don't know that we're going to do that exclusively with the SEC. But I do think there are conferences that bring more equity to the table than others, and that equity is reflected in what we're doing with the BCS and the postseason football. And I think as we look for partners, we're probably looking within that group for partnerships, and what those may be is unknown at this point in time.
Would that be possibly affected by some of the scenarios involved in determining the playoff teams down the road, like strength of schedule may help to try to increase your non-conference schedule earlier in the season?
Well, you're right that strength of schedule is going to be an element. It's strength of non-conference schedule as well as strength of conference schedule. Obviously, we do quite well relative to the latter. But I think it's going to depend a little bit on what circumstance each program is in. Somebody that's trying to build a program from unsuccessful past is not going to schedule a murderer's row in anticipation of getting into the 14 playoff. Having said that, there's a derivative effect that comes from who you play and who they play. And I expect that there'll be some sort of an index. It won't be exactly like the ratings percentage index that the basketball committee uses, but there'll be some metric that we use on non-conference scheduling. And I think that metric and its impact on who's selected and how they're seated will, over time, cause people to schedule more competitively. And the other piece of that is as an important nuance to it is we want to be able to schedule high-level competition in the early portion of the season without the risk of a loss eliminating you from consideration for the playoff. And it's, if last year, as an example, if Oregon and LSU had it to do over again, Oregon might not have opted to take that game early in the season because they fought back from that loss throughout the entire year. And so there's a balancing act there, but strength of schedule is going to be a piece of it. And I think you'll see institutions that have a chance to be in the hunt being careful, maybe not necessarily about playing all top 10 teams in the preseason, but perhaps avoiding teams that might damage their strength of schedule down the road.
Do you think that means you might eventually go away from teams playing 1AA schools every year?
I don't. The 1AA, the FCA, or FCS teams, I think there'll be a way to weight that, and I think there has to be, and therefore institutions will be able to make a considered decision based upon, if you're playing two other highly ranked or traditionally strong programs, you might be able to afford to play an FCS school, and that'll be a local decision. On the other hand, if you play three of them, you're probably going to be penalized and should be. There's a balance between getting your football team ready for the football season and scheduling 3 home blowouts that sell tickets but don't make you any better and don't represent any sort of strengthening in your schedule. I think institutions are going to have to undertake a considered process to decide what's best for them.
Have you heard of other elements that'll go into the selection process or a timetable of when that stuff will be flushed out? I know you're certain teams saying that they're kind of waiting to see how they're going to schedule some of those last non-conference teams.
My sense is that the committee will do some of that once the selection committee is identified. My guess is that it's going to be larger rather than smaller. It will include representation from every conference plus some others, some number of others, and I could see it being as large as 24 and as small as 14 or 15. If I had to guess, I'd guess it would be larger, and I'd guess that group will have some input into how the metrics are shaped, just as the basketball committee has a lot of input into how the RPI metrics are shaped. But strength of schedule will be a part of it, and that's what we have to figure out, is how do we arm that committee with the tools that it takes to differentiate the achievements of one institution from the achievements of the other, because there's always going to be that 4th place team that gets in and that 5th place team that gets left out, or that 12th ranked team that gets in and the 13th ranked team that gets left out of the bowl championship series games. And so we have to get it right, and I think part of it will be imposed by the commissioners group, and I think part of it will be developed by the selection committee once they're seated. And the other thing is, we've talked a fair amount about whether or not it makes some sense to configure the committee soon enough to do a shakedown through the coming seasons. And I think most people think that's a good idea if we can do it without being a distraction. And Obviously, if you have a parallel process going with a group, there's going to be a lot of media interest, and so we have to kind of weigh how that all fits together.
Bob, the index that you speak of for selecting teams, I think a lot of people would figure wins, strength of schedule, and conference championship would be the three big determining factors. I'm sure it's more complex than that. What should be important beyond just those three obvious ones? It sounds like it's much more involved than that.
Well, one of the things, if you put it in the basketball environment, one of the things that the basketball committee looks hard at is what did you do with the portion of the schedule over which you had control? None of us have control of our conference schedule, but the portion that over which we have control should have something to say about how you're evaluated. Certainly how you fared, wins and losses, where you played the games. Oftentimes you get to 5 teams that all look alike, and one of those teams went out and scheduled and won some games on the road, and another one didn't. And that may be the determining factor. The problem with the comparison with the basketball selection process is that the numbers of teams selected are obviously very different, and the number of points of data is also very different. You don't have 10 or 11 or 12 non-conference games on which to evaluate. You have 3 or 4 at the most, and how the postseason playoff in those leagues that have a playoff is valued. Should that be more important than the rest of the season's games? I think one of the things that bears saying is that one of the things we wanted to retain in the playoff is the quality of the regular season. No one can argue that the October and November in college football isn't the greatest regular season in college sports. I think likewise, it's very hard to argue that September is a great part of the college football season. Other than the obvious energy and excitement about a new season starting, we have a lot of very bad football games, and some very one-sided mismatches. There are some good games too, but there are lots of institutions that are doing what they have to sell tickets and not much more. And so I think there's going to be a balancing act there, and there are some striking similarities and some obvious similarities between this process and the basketball process, and there are some ways in which it is extraordinarily different. And quite frankly, that just hasn't been something we've spent a lot of time on just yet, but we'll need to.
Again, along those lines, should scores be considered? In other words, 59-20 win as compared to a 14-13 win against similar opponents, or should TV ratings be considered?
Well, I don't think point differential ever should be considered because it's obviously an inducement to run up the score and do things that are unsportslike, and so I don't think that should ever happen. But it's unrealistic to think that people aren't going to view a 38-10 win differently than they view 14-13, especially in a close game. And so are the committee members going to look at that sort of thing? Sure. But I don't think they're going to, we shouldn't ever put a premium on score differential. And so I'd be very surprised if we did. Now, site, how do you weigh a close win at home versus a close win on the road by the same teams involving the same opponent? Those are things where you can certainly slice and dice.
How about who would be the best TV attraction? Should that enter in at all?
In terms of selecting the 4 teams?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it ought to. I don't think it ought to. You ought to earn it on the field, and there'll be some compelling stories. There's no doubt about that. I mean, everybody likes to watch the stories as the season evolves, but yeah, I think it has to be earned on the field.
You know, you've laid out a lot of the things that the committee's gonna be looking at or thinking about. Sounds like there's, you know, a lot of them. The schedules of these schools are made out so many years in advance. So like, what kind of time frame are we looking at now to where this committee can say, okay, this is XXX, this is what you need, you know, prior to the, you know, the playoff actually starting in a couple of years? How much time do
Well,
schools have to adjust?
We've got 3 subcommittees. There's a revenue sharing subcommittee, there's a site selection subcommittee, and there's a television committee. And we obviously have 24 semifinals and 12 finals to take to the marketplace, along with a bunch of other games. And so that's a big undertaking. The issue of site selection over a 12-year period, big undertaking. And you overlay it with the likelihood that many of the championship games will be played in venues that are shared with professional teams, and you know, there are calendar issues, and it's a complex environment. And everybody has always believed that all the boats ought to rise from a financial standpoint, and so all of those are going forward on parallel paths. And there are also first negotiation, first right of refusals with some of our television partners and some of our current hosts. And so we have to, there's some things that have to be done in a linear fashion. And so by March, April, I'd hope we'd be pretty well finished with all of this. We'd know where the national championship game was going to be. We would know who's going to have the first semifinals. We would know what the sites are. I mean, that's really not a stake in the ground. It's not, you know, Bill Hancock could better tell you than I could, but it seems to me it's reasonable that within 6 months we ought to have a lot of this stuff put together. I serve on the site selection and the revenue distribution, and we met last week, and we brought a lot of things to closure. Are we prepared to roll it out just yet? No, but this has a lot of moving parts.
We have time for
But
one
it's
more
a
question.
12-year deal. We need to make sure we get it right.
Right.
And more than anything else, we need to get it right for the kids on the field, for the coaches, and for the fans. I think this is an enormous step forward for college football, and it has the potential to strengthen the one portion of the schedule that is not as strong as it needs to be. It retains the traditional postseason within the bowl games, and it determines a national champion on the field from among the 4 most deserving teams. And that New Year's Day and New Year's Eve day and evening is going to be a spectacular celebration of college football. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Bob, the scheduling that you talked about for having teams be ambitious, I guess, it could be hard for some teams, especially financially, to get out of games and get into another one. If it, for example, if they have a low BCS team, they have a chance to play a BCS team, and maybe they're going to have a good year and they could enhance their schedule, and at the end of the year, it's a great decision. It could be hard for those schools. Could the Big 12 somehow help facilitate, whether making arrangements on the back end with other schools financially, anything like that? Could you guys involve yourselves just to further, I guess just to make this more possible than just, it sounds very easy, it's not. Could you guys help somehow?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that. You know, that's the kind of thing that the conference ought to be at least considering. But I really haven't thought about it. It's a good question. And, you know, as I said earlier, I don't think you have to play murderer's row. I think you have to develop a schedule that is going to be conducive to getting your team ready and also to demonstrating what you can do against intersectional competition. And for some institutions, you know, that may just mean don't play any FCS schools. For others, it may mean you know, you've got to play and beat some people from other top-ranked leagues in order to demonstrate that you're viable in the postseason.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you all for coming.